Father God, we lift our hands and our hearts to you this evening, recognizing, God, that you are a God of justice and peace. You delight in mercy and love. And we ask that as we reflect on what is justice, that we remember that it all begins with love. And we remember those who are suffering, and we ask that you would bind their hearts and comfort them. We remember those who are incarcerated, and then we ask that you would touch their situations. We remember those who are victims of crimes, and we ask that you would be with them in these experiences. And it's fitting that we're here in a church, because it is the church that is the community. And as a church, we are recognizing that this evening. And we ask that you would bless this discussion and bless the public officials who are here this evening. We recognize the great calling upon each one of us to do justice, to love mercy, and help us to walk humbly. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Let me say good evening to everyone. You weren't ready for that. You were distracted, so you weren't ready. Let's try that one more time. Good evening, everybody. All right, that's a lot better. You were much more prepared. We want to say a word of welcome to each and every one of you. We're glad that you're here this evening. And all of us who sit in this spot today are concerned about the welfare of our community. We have several who are city leaders and officials, but we have just a wide cross-section of people from all walks of life. And we want to say we are delighted that you took the time on this cool day. You got up and you got out. And we want to tell you how much we appreciate that. It speaks volumes about where your heart is. I want to especially highlight a few individuals here today. I want to welcome our city officials who are here, all of our city council members who are here. If my city council members could please stand, we just want to say thank you for being here. And other city officials, if you are here, praise God. We love you guys. We thank God for all the hard work that you do, and for the times when we beat you up and abuse you and put you through the mill, but you are steady. And we thank God for your steady hands. I want to especially welcome someone who's been so dear to me over the past year in the person of Miss Eileen Cox. She is the chaplain trainer at the Morristown Medical Center. And I just want to say welcome, Eileen. Please stand, Eileen. I love her so much. Please welcome Eileen, everybody. And she's the one who pours into me in preparation for the work of a chaplain. So I am a chaplain because of all the work that she has done with me in getting me ready to serve. And she knows all my secrets. Just don't bribe her, and she won't tell you anyway, even if you try to squeeze it out of her. I love her so very much. She's absolutely awesome. Matter of fact, in 2 weeks, Eileen is going to be back to do our training on how to deal with grief and to help people who are grieving. So we're going to have that not this coming Saturday, but the following Saturday. So welcome to Eileen, and to her husband, we say welcome to you also, sir. God bless you. We're glad that you're here. And then, of course, we have, I will say this, and I think I can say this fairly with good conviction, with solid conviction. We have the best mayor around here. I love this man of God. I love his spirit. I love his sense of service and commitment to the community. And we value the fact that when stuff is going on, he's on the front line. I remember there was a fire that one of our members had, and he was right there. And I thank you for serving us and serving us so well. I'm going to ask a friend of mine, just an anointed man. We have school board officials here. Orange High is here, everybody. Come on, Orange High is in the house. Members from the Orange High School, we just thank God that Orange High is being represented. Brother Derek Green is a senior advisor to the Murphy administration, and when Governor Murphy was running for a position, at least when he was thinking about it, we went out and ate, and Governor Murphy came here. We laid hands on him and blessed him and asked God to anoint his service and his ministry and his campaign. And we did not know how God was going to do it, but God did something awesome. And Derek has been a friend of this ministry for many, many years. We go back 35, maybe 35 years. And he's going to come and he's going to make some remarks and introduce some of the officials who are here today. And I want him to do that in his official capacity as senior advisor to the governor of the state of New Jersey. Please put your hands together for our brother, this man of God, mighty man of God, this preacher, this teacher, Elder Reverend Derek Green. Come on, give him better. He's better than it. Come on, everybody. Here we go.
Happy Sabbath, everyone. I'm honored to be here today. And let me just begin by saying, giving honor to God, who's ahead of my life, and to your pastor. Look at this. This is outstanding. By the way, this is just our regular AY service. But this is great. And I want to just give honor and praise to your pastor, Dr. Stoddard, for his vision. He's a visionary. He's somebody who the governor trusts, who the governor has called on. He served on the transition team. He is a man of God. I've known him for many years. And let's stand to our feet and give your pastor a round of applause. Amen. Amen. The subject today on criminal justice and criminal justice reform is very easy. The governor sees criminal justice reform out of the lens of a former NAACP board member. We have the blessing of having, I think, the only governor in the country that has ever served on the board of national board of the NAACP. And to that end, he chose people in his cabinet that share his same vision. And we joined the local officials here, the local folks from Orange, from Irvington that are here, and your mayor, who is an outstanding leader. I've known, Mayor, we've known each other now for 25 years when I was an intern at the prosecutor's office, and you were in the third grade, right? Now, how did that happen? He was a budding attorney at that time in the prosecutor's office, and he has done such a great job. But I'm here with two individuals. And let me say this, two individuals who believe in criminal justice reform, who believe in social justice, who believe in the positive relationship between law enforcement and the community. I am proud to introduce first the greatest attorney general in this country. The greatest attorney general in this country, a man who is transformational, Mr. Grewal. Good to see you. I've had an opportunity to work very closely with him. And I'll tell you that I don't know an attorney general in this country that is doing the things that he is doing in this state. And we are so proud. I know the governor is just so proud of the work that he does every day. He is here. He didn't send a representative. He came himself. He came himself. And he has a lot of folks working for him. He could have sent a representative, but he came himself. And we thank you for being here, Mr. General. Also, the next person I want to introduce, who I've worked very closely with, I call him Brother Colonel. And I call him Brother AG. That's what I do. And this gentleman has really taken the state police by storm. And I will tell you that his commitment to diversity and inclusion, his commitment to being accessible, he has met all around this state with the Attorney General, with community groups, with faith leaders, with community leaders, with elected officials, anybody. Again, he's here. He didn't send a representative. He came himself. Let's stand to our feet again and welcome the Superintendent of the State Police, Colonel Pat Callahan. You know, and there's nothing like when you have a shared ethos, when you share the vision, and this governor has picked an entire cabinet. Matter of fact, it's the most diverse cabinet in the history of New Jersey. Y'all didn't hear me. The most diverse cabinet in the history of New Jersey is an old state. It's one of the 13 original colonies. It's an old state. Been around for a long time. But this is the most diverse cabinet. And these two men are leading the charge as it relates to criminal justice and social justice. And I'll just say this, that we're blessed that we have a governor the way in Phil Murphy. We've heard what happened in Virginia, right? Everybody's heard what happened in Virginia. And we don't have a governor like that. We have a governor who sees social justice out of the lens of a former NAACP member. I thank God for that. Thank you very much.
Amen. Come on, put your hands together, everybody. And it is only appropriate that we hear from our good friend, our brother, the mayor of this fair city. I'm going to ask Mayor Warren if he'd come now and just give his welcome to all of you and to our state officials to the Township of Orange. Come on, Mr. Mayor. Come on, put your hands together for our mayor, everybody.
Good afternoon, church. Good afternoon, church. I am Mayor Warren. I welcome you to the city of Orange Township. I am happy to be in this house. Let's give Reverend Stoddard a hand. Too many hands cannot be had for this man, for what he does in our community all the time. Not just because he looks good, not just because he wants to be famous. He does it because it's right. Thank you, Reverend Stoddard, and to your First Lady who I saw here today. I know the strength of a First Lady if you're going to be a successful man. So to her, I give my greetings. My city council is here. I want them to stand again. City council members of the city of Orange Township. Our council president is here. Council vice president is here. The ward council person is here in the West Ward. Adrian Wooten is here. The dean of the city council is here. That means she served the longest. She's the youngest, served the longest. Figure that out. She is here. Donna Williams called me and told me, Pastor, that she would try to make it. She would be a little delayed. But I want to thank them for all that they do in supporting me and what we do here in the city of Orange Township. Our colleague from Irvington, Dr. Hudley, is here. She's also from National Action Network. Give her a hand. Thank you for being here. I saw the NAACP in the back. Where is our president? Stand up. Mr. Perrier, give him a hand. Whenever I need chastisement, I'm sure to get it over the email from Brother Perrier. Thank you for all that you do, sir. There's a special group here also, Reverend. I just want to point them out. It is the mayor's peer youth group. Where they please stand. Young people who are in high school, going off to college, top grades. They've sent legislation to the town and doing stuff for their community. I want to thank them for being here as well. Thank you guys for coming out. This is an important issue. When we talk about law enforcement and we talk about the minority experience, it's certainly good to have this discussion. And what a pleasure it is to have it with the person who is the lead law enforcement in the state of New Jersey. Now, we do have a history, Brother Pastor. It is a long history in New Jersey, but most of you, you're probably too young to remember racial profiling. You don't remember we didn't have enough blacks on the state police. You don't remember when they used to stop you just for being black itself. You don't remember when you and I didn't look like what the police force looked like. But our governor, Governor Murphy, had the bold authority to walk in and appoint someone from a whole different community who doesn't look like anyone. He worships differently, he looks differently, but he speaks the same language of justice. So, Attorney General, thank you for being here on board. Appreciate it. And finally, our state police. I know state police directly because my brother was on the committee for the state police and the NAACP, and he reports to me all the time how the state police are doing. And when the governor appointed a new colonel to the state police, he gave me a good report card, and he said this guy is going to be out into the community. I saw him at National Action Networks. I saw him here at St. Matthew's Church. He's here today. Thank you, sir, for being on the front lines with us. Thank you, welcome, and we're sure to have a good time today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. This time I'm going to ask the three panelists who are here, if you could please go on the stage at this time. And I want to just give us a little bit of ground rules as we begin the discussions that we will have. You have a program in your hand. We will allow for, at the end of the presentations, we will allow for some interaction in terms of questions and responses. Your program kind of gives you a highlight as to how things will flow. We would ask that you'll respect that. I don't need to reiterate it. It's printed in black and white in front of you. I do want to say, let the church say amen. I do want to say that while all of us are passionate about our positions, and we are, you know, if you hold a position, you hold that position dearly, and we will articulate and pontificate and drag it on out. What we're doing then, in order to keep things going and to give as many people an opportunity to speak, we want to ask that you'll respect a 2 to 3 minute time limit, somewhere in that ballpark, so that everybody who wants to share will have a chance to share. And if everybody gets a chance to share and then nobody else wants to share, then we will give you an opportunity to circle back. Fair enough, everybody? Is that fair enough? All right. So if you feel like preaching, save it for Sunday morning. Let the church say amen. Amen. I think we're going to be all right. I think we're going to be all right. Interspersed in the discussion will be my research director into this issue of criminal justice reform and marijuana legalization potentially, and all of that, all of the related matters. This is Brother Kevin. He's a brilliant man. Stand up, Kevin. This is Kevin, everybody. He's the man who put together the research documents that we will reference somewhat as we have this discussion, so that we're not just talking off the top of our heads, but we're looking at data that will help inform our discussion. Is that all right, everybody? So Brother Kevin is the data man, and he has done significant research to help us as we articulate in this discussion. So for right now, we're going to give our AG the opportunity to share. He'll be the lead person to share his perspective on where we are going as a state in terms of criminal justice reform and related matters as he sees fit. Mr. AG, you're up, sir.
Well, thank you, Pastor, for that introduction, and thank you for opening up your church for this critically important dialogue. As the mayor was talking about, we come from different faith traditions and we come from different backgrounds, but we come together today to talk about a problem that we all have to come together to address and solve and improve, which is the criminal justice system and criminal justice reform. So I think it's only fitting that we're having this discussion here in the community, because this is where the solutions are going to come from. I was reading something a couple of weeks ago as I was preparing to speak at an event for Martin Luther King Day. And it was a speech that Dr. King had given in 1967, where he talked about building a coalition of conscience, about people coming together to solve the problems of the time. And I think that's what's needed right now, and that's what we're doing by coming together. And the pastor asked me to touch on police-community relations and criminal justice reform and marijuana legalization. And before I get into briefly each of those topics, and we'll tease them out during the question and answer session, I think it's also fitting to go back to Dr. King and to help everyone understand how I approach law and order, because it's how Dr. King approached law and order. And I go back to a letter from a Birmingham jail, and they're often quoted passages and portions from that letter, but I go to a different passage and a different portion of that letter that doesn't get quoted too often, in which Dr. King said that law and order exist for the purpose of establishing justice. And when they fail in that regard, they become the dangerously structured dams that block the flow of social progress. And so that's what motivates me as Attorney General, as we are trying to address all of these issues in this particular moment that we're living in, which is a difficult moment. I'm guided by trying to attain that higher level of justice that Dr. King spoke about, to push forward on social progress and social justice. And so when we talk about police-community relations, when I took office last January, I set 4 priorities. 1 was fighting the opioid crisis, 2 was addressing violent crime, 3 was improving police-community relations, and the 4th was to really just make a concerted effort to address community needs through engagement. So it really ties to improving police-community relations. And the reason for that is, when I came into office, I saw that divides existed. I saw that as a county prosecutor, I saw that as a federal prosecutor, and I saw that in the wake of events all across the country. that divides existed between law enforcement and community, that they were divides really filled with mistrust and filled with, or created by experiences that might have happened in that particular community or that particular state. But I saw that as an opportunity because I thought divides could be bridged and that we could bridge those divides by bringing folks together. And so we're pursuing that higher level of justice by making improving police-community relations a pillar of our platform at the Attorney General's office. And I'll just touch briefly on some of the ways in which we're doing that. First and foremost, we're pushing for transparency. We're pushing for accountability. My first 3 law enforcement directives. As a chief law enforcement officer for the state, I have the opportunity to set policy, really the privilege. And I do that through Attorney General's directives. My first 3 directives in February of last year were aimed at those goals: transparency, trust, and accountability between law enforcement and community. The first thing I did was issue a directive that said if we had body camera or dash camera footage of a use of force incident or of an officer-involved shooting, that we would presumptively release that within 20 days of the incident. Because it was important for me that we not have a situation like happened in Chicago, in the Laquan McDonald killing, where law enforcement sat on a video and it bred mistrust with the community. We need those 20 days to run out the investigation, to do the witness interviews, but after that, the video will show what the video shows and we'll deal with the fallout from the video. And so that was important for me because I thought that was a way to really build trust, that we're not afraid. Whatever the videos show, we'll put them out within 20 days, and we've been doing that since last February, all across the state. The second directive that I issued in February was for what are called early warning systems. And these are systems that some police departments have where they could identify problem behavior with officers, too many use of force incidents in a calendar year, a domestic violence complaint or citizen complaints, things of that nature. But not all departments were doing this. So I said, this is a no-brainer. We have to have every law enforcement agency in the state implement an early warning system. The state police has an excellent early warning system. But we want to identify those problematic officers early on. And if they can be retrained, if they can get help, then we'll get them that help and that retraining. But if they can't, then they should find a different profession. Because this is one of the most honorable professions. And people like the colonel work way too hard to elevate that profession and to humanize the badge and to build these bridges and to build trust with community that we can't afford to backslide. And the third directive that we issued was for random drug testing. Believe it or not, it was never a statewide policy to require random drug testing in all our police departments. And that goes hand in hand with problem behavior. So with those 3 directives, I thought we set a tone early on as to how we're going to establish trust, how we're going to promote transparency, and how we're going to push for accountability. More recently, recent newspaper reporting has shown that there are issues with use of force across the state. And for 17 years, the Attorney General's office collected use of force data from all of our departments, and they diligently reported it. But for 17 years, the Attorney General's office never standardized that reporting. They never made it easy for departments to report. And guess what? They didn't do anything with the data. They didn't use it as a tool for training or as a tool for accountability or as a tool to build trust. And what happened was that you had a 17-month investigation by a newspaper that highlighted all the deficiencies in our system, all the problems, and put that information out there for the public to see. When I saw that, I said, we should be doing that. This is a problem we created, that we didn't have a way to collect this data, to analyze it, and also, importantly, to put it into context. Because it has to be an apples-to-apples comparison and fairness to the law enforcement officers. Because some departments have higher numbers than others, but you can't say that that department is worse than another department without understanding that Atlantic City deals with 10 million people coming in, or probably millions more each year, to the casinos. And so their numbers might be skewed by that. Or Paramus has the busiest shopping mall in the world, and that's where some of their incidents occur. So we have to develop this system, and we've started that process. And it is my goal to get that system in place by the end of the year so we could use that as a way to hold problematic officers accountable, to improve problematic officers where they can be improved, and also to build trust, because we want to share that information publicly. It shouldn't be a newspaper that does that. That's my job as the Chief Law Enforcement Officer. And to start that process, we started it just like this, with a community meeting in Cumberland County in the basement of a church in Bridgeton. And we'll continue having those dialogues because we need to hear what the community's concerns are with law enforcement, so we could better track those concerns, and we could use those concerns to build out this system. And that's that coalition I was talking about, because we have to do this together. And we need partners like Pastor Stoddard, like Pastor Green, the mayor, the colonels all in, and we just need to do this right together, and that's a commitment that I share with you this afternoon, and that's something we will do pushing forward. Also, to build trust between law enforcement and community. We stood up an office this year called the Office of Public Integrity and Accountability. And the goal of that office is not just to hold law enforcement accountable for criminal civil rights violations, and Mayor, don't get upset with me here, but also to hold public officials accountable. I don't need to tell people in this room. I don't need to tell people in this room that there's been some corruption in politics in New Jersey. You know, yeah, a few. Oh, and believe it or not, over the last half century, the mayor of every one of our major 5 cities in this state has been indicted on public corruption charges. And in some cases, multiple mayors in the same city, one after the next. And so we're sending a strong message that we're going to hold not just law enforcement accountable, all public officials accountable to restore trust in government. And that's a big part of what we're doing. Some of this we'll get into during our question and answer. Other efforts that we're undertaking to pursue that level of higher justice and to promote trust between law enforcement and community goes to training. We have mandated, for the first time ever, implicit bias training for every state trooper in this state by the end of 2019. And that's important. We're going to then push it out and require it from all of our 30,000+ law enforcement officers in this state, because all of their interactions have to be free from bias. And they have to be trained to recognize that implicit bias, that unconscious bias that all of us have, but importantly, they have to be trained not to act on it. And so that's a commitment we've made publicly, that we're going to start with the state police with that training by the end of 2019. The colonel and I have already taken it together along with all the directors in my department. And that's important because we're responsible for hiring, we're responsible for promoting, and so we have to be free of those implicit biases as well and learn not to act on them if we have them, and we all do. And so that's a big part of what we're doing as well with training. De-escalation is a big part of what we're doing, giving our officers additional tools so they could de-escalate situations short of using force, recognize if someone's in a mental health crisis on how to engage in verbal dialogue that could bring the temperature of that situation down and that it doesn't lead to the use of force. So those are all tools that we're committed to giving our law enforcement officers. But the final piece with respect to building trust is what the mayor talked about, making sure that our law enforcement agencies look like the communities they serve. And that starts with us, but that's also a community solution to that problem, because we're going to open up the process for the next upcoming state police classes. And we're going to need the help of the community to build up that applicant pool. And we're going to come back to you to ask you to help us find kids and young people who are interested in becoming law enforcement officers and New Jersey State Troopers. I was just sort of shaken a little bit when I saw this young gentleman sitting with the colonel and trying on his hat. That's the future colonel right there, right? That's a future colonel. Or the future pastor, because he wants your seat. So, you know, those are just some of the things we're doing. I've also required 84 community meetings by all our county prosecutors. All 21 of our county prosecutors have to have 4 community meetings every year to seed conversations and to seed additional meetings and to build that trust in a comfortable environment so that our prosecutors and our local law enforcement are not meeting each other for the first time in a crisis situation. And that's a big part of what we're doing as well. It's called the 2121 Project, a 21 county 21st century policing tour. The pastor mentioned criminal justice reform. In 2017, we undertook this effort. We voted on it. It was a constitutional amendment that we changed the way we handled bail in this state. In 2017, we went away from a cash-based system to a risk-based system. And the reason for that was plain. Chief Justice Rabner pushed this effort for reform. And he said that we had too many people incarcerated pre-trial who were low-risk defendants but simply could not afford the bail to get out. And the result was that you had disproportionately minority members of our communities locked up because they couldn't afford low bails. And what ended up happening was people would just say, I've been in, they've offered me a time-served plea, and they would just take pleas. And that's not justice. And so we moved to a risk-based system. At that point in 2017, we had about 8,000 people locked up pre-trial. And we implemented criminal justice reform, this risk-based assessment. We released people on conditions of release that they had to check in, or they might not have any conditions. And only the most dangerous, and only those that presented the greatest risk of flight were kept in. And we've cut our pretrial jail population in half. It's less than 4,000 now. And here's the other thing, because when we went down this path of reform, people said crime would spike, crime would go up, and crime's gone down as well. So there has not been a related increase in crime as the jail populations went down, and that shows you we're on the right track here in New Jersey. The problems with the criminal justice reform that we've seen, we're fixing them, we're tweaking little things here and there, but by any account, it's been a success. Our efforts moving forward this year and going to the upcoming years now have to be focused on municipal fines and fees. This is critically important. Municipal fines and fees are a flashpoint and a crisis waiting to happen in the state from a law enforcement perspective. And the reason I say that is I understand our cities are cash-strapped. I understand that no one wants to raise taxes. I understand that there are problems everywhere and that we need money to fix those problems in our cities. But we can't do that by monetizing our citizens. We can't do that by not seeing them as people and starting to see them as sources of revenue. And we saw what happened in Ferguson. We saw that in Ferguson. You had a city, and just you don't have to take my word for it. Read the 2015 Justice Department report on what happened in Ferguson. You had a city that saw its residents not as people but as sources of revenue. And that when there was a tragic officer-involved shooting, there was a gap in trust between law enforcement and community. Right. And it was a gap that was filled with anger, and it was a gap that erupted into riots that were sustained over several weeks. And so that is a problem waiting to happen in the state. The Supreme Court just put out a report on municipal fines and fees calling for that system to be reformed. And we are working with the Supreme Court on that. We are working with legislators who are interested in looking at ways to reform this system, to find alternatives, to find ways that we could, there are people, our fines and fees don't vary on your ability to pay. And so there are people who get locked in this cycle that they get a fine, then they can't pay that fine, and then they get a contempt citation, and then they get locked up, or they lose their license, and then they drive without a license because they have to go to work. It is a vicious cycle that we are committed to trying to break. Let me, I'll just finish by touching on marijuana. And I'm not avoiding the topic, but this is something that our legislators and our governor will decide. It's not something the Attorney General, as Attorney General, I've weighed in on. And the only thing I've said about marijuana legalization, if it's coming down the road, is that if we're going to do this, if this is ultimately what the legislators and the governor decide, then we have to have that social justice piece with it. That bill has to be a part of it because we have to do it for the right reasons. And if we're going to do it, that expungement piece has to be there. But not only the expungement piece, we need the money to do those expungements quickly. That if you legalize on Wednesday, you got to make sure that the people who got caught up in the system on Tuesday can get their records expunged so they can get a job on Thursday. I've spoken long enough. Juvenile justice reform, the pastor was just reminding me of juvenile justice reform. We could talk about the inequities in the adult criminal justice system, and we could talk about the numbers that we're seeing and how we're trying to fix it on the back end. The real way to fix it is on the front end. And so what we've done is we've taken a deep look into the juvenile justice system. The governor signed an executive order putting together a juvenile justice task force. We've announced our commitment to close Jamesburg and to get rid of that detention facility for juvenile boys. And we've committed ourselves to a juvenile detention alternatives initiative to bring our pretrial population or our incarcerated population rather of juveniles down. And we've achieved tremendous success all across the state. And juvenile detention alternatives is simply having the social workers, having community members, having all those other stakeholders in those juvenile courtrooms. So the judge has an option different than sending someone to a community confinement center or to Jamesburg, that they could send them into if the young person needs help or needs social services or needs any type of, maybe it's a mental health service. All those folks are sitting in our courtrooms, and the numbers have gone down drastically. And so I think that's a big way in which we find a way to fix the inequities in the adult incarceration system. This year, you'll also see from us guidelines for station house adjustments to give our law enforcement officers who have the ability to just keep someone out of the system altogether by using their discretion. But we see some racial inequities there on how station house adjustments are done. And so for once and for all, we're going to give our local law enforcement officers guidelines on how to implement station house adjustments in a consistent and fair manner. And that, I hope, will have an effect in the adult system. So with that, those are just some of the ways that we're trying to seek that higher level of justice I spoke about at the outset. We'll have more discussion in our back and forth in our Q&A, and I don't want to take all of the Colonel's time either. So with that, I'll conclude my remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, General, and thank you for the invitation, Dr. Stoddard. It's good to see you again. I often say that I think if we had more meetings in churches, we may get a lot more done. So, and today I don't see that'll be any different. I'll start with just a few minutes on Jaden, who was the young man that greeted me when I got here this afternoon. And I think it's important to the General's point about humanizing the badge and building trust. He'll be 10 on February 7th. And the first look, sometimes when I see young children and students, that this uniform sometimes come with a sense of intimidation. And that's nothing that I take any pride in. I think when young men and young women, when a soon-to-be 10-year-old quarterback, straight-A student told me he wants to be the President of the United States, when and what I impress upon our men and women troopers, that I don't want this uniform to give an impression of intimidation. I want it to come with a sense of trust and a sense of calm to a situation. So in that 15 or 20 minutes, when I didn't stand over the top of Jaden, when I took a knee and sat down next to him so we were eye to eye, that's intentional. And that's what needs to happen across the entire country when it comes to law enforcement. The other piece I'll touch about, and the General talked about, that humanizing the badge, that communities need to see those in law enforcement as mothers, as fathers, as Little League coaches, as Sunday school teachers. And what we do when we're not in this, to me, is really more important than what you do when you're wearing it, because everybody in town knows that a trooper lives there, knows that the trooper is the football coach. And it's important when we talk about being held to a higher standard and embracing that scrutiny, they have to embrace that scrutiny because they raised their hand and swore to protect those people in the state of New Jersey. So if I had the chance to talk to the class that's in the academy now, they're in their first week, and I talked to them, this isn't a free pass. This is being held to a higher standard. This doesn't mean you can drink and drive. This doesn't mean that you can lie. This doesn't mean that you can steal. This means that you have the whole state of New Jersey watching you, and if you trip up and it's a career ender, it kind of broad strokes across all of law enforcement, and that little bit of reservoir of trust that we've built gets withdrawals. And that's why it's important, that 7-minute motor vehicle stop, that 30-minute encounter when somebody's car was burglarized, the domestic that you're at, all those situations that troopers and law enforcement come across, that's the opportunity to engage. Whether it's 7 minutes or 7 hours, how those those citizens feel when that encounter is over. They may have left with a speeding summit for 92, but were they treated with respect? Was their dignity intact? And was it a professional encounter? And I bet there's thousands of them a day, but there's also the negative ones, and that's the ones, and it could happen in Sacramento, California, it could happen in Ferguson, Missouri, but that impacts us here in New Jersey because of social media. And overnight, in 2 minutes, we watch body-worn camera footage of things that happen. And there's some times when I'm sitting at home at my couch and I do watch some of those encounters, and it's not easy to watch. And I know it's not easy for you to watch. It's important to engage with one another. And I'll use a personal example. Within the past year, I had the opportunity to meet Reverend Wilson. He's from St. Matthew's AME Church right here. It was in the basement of a church, and his first question to me was a little bit intimidating about law enforcement shooting young black males. And it was just like, take a deep breath and let's start this hard, candid conversation. Well, you fast forward to this past summer when he invited my wife and I to his church, and we celebrated church on a Sunday. It was probably the most powerful services I had ever been at. Then that church gathered around my wife and I and prayed for her and the health issues she's going through. Fast forward a couple more months, and a gentleman in his church had been stopped by a trooper for speeding. His license was suspended. The car got towed. I asked the colonel in charge of field ops to give me the DVD. I want to see that encounter. The gentleman that got pulled over couldn't have been more professional. The trooper that handled the stop couldn't have been more professional. But what that encounter did was it gave me the opportunity to go back there and after church sit down with the pastor, sit down with the member of his church and walk through the various things that the trooper was doing and to kind of just have that conversation. But one of the greatest things that I thought that came of it, and the Attorney General touched upon it, is about the Motor Vehicle Commission and suspended licenses. And Pastor Wilson said, would you mind talking to the head of motor vehicle and to see if we could do something? Because you know what happened? The member of his church had paid his restoration fee, but it hadn't caught up in the system yet. So that parking ticket in Jersey City led to a suspended license. He fixed it, and then what happens? As the general said, we discovered 80% of suspended motorists drive on a suspended license anyway, and this cycle begins. So 2 days later, I met with the head of motor vehicle and said, Sue, what can we do about this? The black community gets in this hole of a parking ticket. That's not egregious driving behavior. Why is the license being suspended? And then you get caught driving while suspended, and that's another violation. Now you're in this hole, just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and there's legislation now to change that in the state of New Jersey. So it's those moments, it's afternoons like this when we get together, and I think sometimes the questions may be hard, but if those of us sitting up here aren't willing to sit here and listen to and do our best to hear and then answer those hard questions, then we're probably not in the right spots. But on a personal note, my dad was a Jersey trooper for 29 years. My grandfather was a Linden police officer for 32 years. I've really known nothing about service. I certainly am a man of God, as Reverend Green knows, and I can think of no more Christ-like thing for a man or a woman to raise their hand and say, I'll do this job to the best of my ability. I'll even lay down my life for somebody that I don't know. And I think Jesus said it best when he was talking about the Beatitudes in the Sermon on the Mount, when he said, blessed are the peacemakers, because they will be called the children of God. He told me not to preach, so I'm going to cut it. And just one piece about criminal justice reform. I share this personal story because, again, people look and they see this uniform and they see a trooper. But when my son was 19 years old, he was charged with aggravated assault, and he was sentenced to 7 years in state prison. You're looking at a father that went to state prison every weekend with my wife and his siblings to visit him. Because when he got out, I wanted to make sure that he knew that there was a family and a home there to come back to. That's not sometimes the case, and I could tell by those inmates that didn't have people that came to see them every weekend, or if they needed to get their driver's license back and that reentry that we talk about, who would be there to support them. So as a young trooper, when I arrested subjects for drugs or guns, whatever that was, and I drove them to county jail, and that Sallyport door went up, and I went in and I turned them over to the guard, and I backed the troop car out, and I was gone. That was in my rearview mirror. But being on the other side of it now, I'm a totally different person before all of you, and share that with you because I share that with the men and women of the state police, that you need to treat those, even if you arrest them, you need to treat them all with dignity, because some people come into this world with very little, and the last thing they have is their dignity, and I'd say don't dare try and take it from them, because they'll fight you for it. I'll just once again thank you all for being here. I'm honored. I'm honored to be a Jersey trooper, and I'm honored that we have men and women that strive to keep those of us safe and do it in a manner that's professional, that builds trust, that when you get stopped by a Jersey trooper, that encounter will be professional. It'll be one filled with respect. And if it's not, you certainly better let me know about it. God bless.
Come on, put your hands together for these two wonderful men. Colonel, you got some preaching in you. And, you know, you don't quote the Bible unless you read it. And it is obvious that you have that personal connection with God. And thank you for being human.
Yes, sir.
What you shared today made you human to us. And thank you so much for the vision that the both of you have set for the law enforcement community in the state of New Jersey, and the intentionality with which you are approaching some of these very difficult issues. I think it's important that you continue to push that agenda. No organization can rise any higher than its leadership. No organization rises any higher than its leadership. Every organization rises and falls on leadership. And so the work that you do is absolutely imperative, and the trickle-down effect to those who are partners with you, I believe we have yet to see the great results that the future holds. God bless you both. We love you guys, and we thank God for your service. Put your hands together, everybody. And we're gonna have a period of question and answers in just a few moments, because I know some of you are itching to ask them stuff, because some of you got tickets and you want to know how come. Can I get this expunged from my driving record? I got the people who can do it. So right now, though, we want to transition and hear from our mayor just a little bit, because there are some young people here that I know they are stellar in their performance and what they're doing, and we're going to give our mayor a chance to just talk about that a little bit.
Thank you, Pastor, and to Attorney General and to our Colonel, certainly thank you for being here, for being present and being able to ask questions. The one thing you should know when you come to Orange, we're going to ask you tough questions. So I'm going to take a little bit, Pastor, to take the heat off of them so they can get ready for the questions that'll come. Just a few moments, because I want to get to questions as well. The Attorney General's direction and leadership is important on a local level, and just let me tell you how. When there's an incident in Orange, no matter what it may be, a violent crime, it may be something less serious than that, but there's a process that is set up where our department is able to plug right into the local prosecutor's office, the Essex County Prosecutor's Office, to get investigative help, to get guidance, and to get backup on what's going to happen to that person after the arrest. And that is an important dialogue and communication system that we have, because we feel the brunt of it when we make an arrest, when we send someone to court, and the disposition of that case, if they come back to our community, they become a menace back in our community. If there's dialogue between our locality and the prosecutor's office and the Attorney General's office, and we talk about what services they're able to provide, when we're able to know who's on probation, who's on parole, who's coming back to the community, we're able to assess All parolees, we're working with them right now. Parolees and probationers, when they come back to the community, we can know who's coming back, and it's our intent as a local police department is to try to interview them to say, if you're coming back, what service do you need? I was out selling drugs, I'm now on probation, but I can't get a job. So we need to hook you up with a job program. If you have mental health issues, if you have family issues, we need to meet you where you are so that the crime that you were engaged in doesn't become a part of your life. And it's a blessing to have an attorney general who's open to that and who has that kind of idea about not just locking people up, but what happens after they come back to our community and getting them service. Young people, gangs is something that we feel here. It's something that's in every municipality. But one of the things that we're determined to do is have people who, we started a gang initiative in the Orange Police Department. And it's filled with people who, first of all, get training, who come back and use their training to make sure that we're able to speak gang language. They have a different language, that we know the culture, that we know where they are, and that we then begin to break the wall down of law enforcement and gang culture, come to the table to find out where they are and why they are there as juveniles. It involves our schools, and I'm so glad that Dwight Holmes on the front row is here. Reggie Miller, I saw him in the back. Reggie Miller, raise your hand. These are people who deal with young men every day who are contemplating, should I go into a gang or should I not go into a gang? Who can I speak to? What's going to happen to me? Can I go into law enforcement? So those are community access points that we continue to have, and we're going to grow with our police department. As many of you know, we do have a police academy for young people in the summertime. It runs, I think, about 4 weeks, and they go in and do virtually everything that a police would do in terms of their training. And after their training, they go through a graduation and they get badges, and you should see the smiles on their faces and the sense of accomplishment that these children have, that they've gone through this process. So now when they're in and they're walking down the street, they know Officer so-and-so, they know the director, they touch base with council persons, with the mayor. It's that kind of breaking down of barriers that we need to show our young people, because we want them to grow into these positions of responsibility. Certainly our Police Athletic League, it was just started up, and it's now even trying to get private funding, but it's a source where police are being involved in recreational activities and extra educational activities for our children. Once again, it's breaking down the barriers. My son, who is 20 years old, when he first got his license and got stopped by the police, he said he was very nervous initially. But then he thought of the things that we have been teaching him all the time and what he's learned in seminars like this in churches, that you turn your lights on, you put your hands up, you calm down, you listen to instructions, you do not resist, you give information. And the best thing, if you're right, at the end, you're going to go home safely. If you're wrong and you cooperate, you're going to go through the system, but then you'll go home safely. So it's cooperation, it's not being intimidated. And I'm so glad we're getting this from the top, from the colonel, who says this uniform is not meant to intimidate. It is meant to go through an orderly process, and on the other end, we come out as whole people. One of the things when I came into this office as mayor, and when you looked at racial profiling, when you looked at disparities in treatment of minorities, one of the things that correlated was officers who weren't exposed, who weren't trained, and who weren't educated. And it's a direct correlation that if you train them, if they're more educated, if they're more worldly, if they know about different cultures, they're going to treat people accordingly. And one of the things that we started with Fairleigh Dickinson University is a partnership where they would come and have classes right here in our police department and in our library, where you can come and earn your degree right here in the city of Orange Township, trying to get a higher level of police officer who's going to deliver a higher level of service to our community. I'm glad that the Attorney General talked about fines and fees, because we are not ATMs. And when many of us who go to court, and I'm a municipal prosecutor, and part of my job is to do plea negotiations and try to resolve cases. But one of the things that we're taught to pay attention to is that you can't overly burden someone with a penalty or a fine. A penalty and a fine is not meant to be the alternative to jail.
That's right.
It is something that is done, you pay your fine, you move on. It's not meant to teach you a lesson or to further hamper you from moving on with your life. And so I'm glad we have the focus on where that should be. But in order to be firm locally, our police department is trying to look to the Attorney General and to the prosecutor's office to say, while we shouldn't overly punish, we should remove the items of criminal behavior. And so if you're using a safe house to store drugs or using a car to store drugs, we're going to start to ask that those things be seized so that they're not in the hands of criminals and turned over to people who can use them in the proper fashion. Community policing. I have directed that our police be engaged in the community. And maybe, Attorney General, I got this from you some kind of way, but we should be engaged in community forums throughout the year with our police. And so we have sectors that whenever there's a community meeting, I want a police officer there. I want police officers getting feedback. And the one thing that I tell them all the time, it is not going to be easy. It's not always going to be nice, but it's constructive because these are the people that we're serving, and if their needs are being communicated to us, we need to listen and we need to respond in like fashion. And lastly, so we can get into questions, on this issue of marijuana. This is not a settled issue. It does have to go before the legislature and be ultimately signed or vetoed by the governor. I personally do not believe that making marijuana available, especially to young people, is a good thing. I'm from the very old school, and I don't know how many of you had this experience. When I came into the house in high school after partying, I may have been tired and therefore my eyes were red, but my father went directly to smelling me and testing me and asking me whether or not you were messing with that funny grass that they smoke. Because he was of the belief, and I share it, that it retards your growth, it makes us less quick, it doesn't do us any good mentally, and so it's something we have to take a hard look at, particularly on the effect it'll have on our young people. It's critical for us. And as I close, I would like Memona to stand up, Memona Ahmed, and Leon Jean-Baptiste to stand up. They are from the peer youth group. You can give them a hand. They are seniors in high school. The mayor's peer youth group is a group of students that, when I was growing up, our students, as students, we were loud and rambunctious and wanted to get involved and wanted to change the world. And I wanted to go and find a group of students like that throughout Orange, and we started the peer youth group. And these are two of the graduating members. They've gotten a scholarship from this church, who's been very generous in making sure that we take the next step. We are waiting, Mamona, we're waiting for Yale's response.
Wow.
She's applied, she's waiting for Yale. We think she's going to get it. Leon Jean-Baptiste, tomorrow, will be using my office to do his Harvard interview. They're coming and considering him to come to school. This is what we produce in Orange. Their activities have taken them before the city council, where they have passed legislation asking shop owners not to put prescription drugs so far in front of counters to be accessible to children. They have held debates for school board and other political activities. These are the kinds of activities that we're trying to push on young people so that they choose a path of righteousness instead of a path of evil, and certainly these two are on it. So please pray for them. I'm doing everything in my power to make sure that it happens. If they have to go to Yale and to Harvard for a visit, my car is available, my wallet is available. I want them to succeed, and we're going to support them. Thank you both. Pastor, we turn it back over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. And I know this marijuana debate is something that's sensitive to all of us. I will reserve the right to speak last. You know, I told somebody today, this is, in as much as I'm the pastor, I do reserve the right to speak last. And I heard a story about Nelson Mandela, that when Mandela went to the tribal meetings, he listened to everybody. And one of the key factors is that Mandela always spoke, his father at least, he learned this from his dad. His dad always was the last one to speak. So let's hear from everybody else in terms of questions and answers and so on and so forth. Elder Green, if you could help us with that and chime in here, we'd appreciate your help.
I think we'll start with the Attorney General and ask him the first question, and that is, what is the criminal justice system and why does it need reforming? What is the criminal justice system and why does it need reforming?
So obviously, the criminal justice system touches folks in different ways, and I think it starts at the municipal level with local law enforcement, and it could be a disorderly persons offense or something minor that gets you in front of a municipal prosecutor, or it could be a more serious violation that gets you into superior court. But the criminal justice system is our courts, it's our law enforcement officers, it's our prosecutors, our defense attorneys, our public defenders. And the reason it needs reform is because there are aspects of it that are not working. We are not doing a good job, as the Colonel touched on, with respect to reentry. We focus on ensuring public safety, and we focus on locking people up, but we don't focus in our correctional system on making them better when they leave. And so the correctional system is part of the criminal justice system too. One of the things that I did when I was a county prosecutor, again, to fix the system, before becoming Attorney General, I was a Bergen County prosecutor. And I would have conversations with my assistant prosecutors about a particular case. And they would bang the table that somebody had to go away for 20 years NERA, no early release. And then I would ask them, do you know what the inside of a state prison looks like? And they said, no. And I said, do you know where you're sending these folks? No. Do you know if they're going to come out better? Well, I don't know that. So I made all my assistant prosecutors as a county prosecutor go visit, at least for a day, a state prison. Some I wish I could have sent there for longer. But at least that way they had perspective as to what was there, and that there was little hope in our correctional system. It's getting better, but that part of the system needs to improve as well. The fines and fees are part of our criminal justice system, and they have to be improved as well. One of the things that we are doing, going back to trying to fix the system, again, we have to stop this monetization of people, but we have to look at it in a smart way. And I go back to data. The state police has a regional operation intelligence center, which is a great tool in us analyzing data, but we have to collect the data. And so one of the things that I am really interested in looking at when we look at fines and fees, I want to see when our towns issue tickets, when they collect fines and fees, what percentage of those tickets are going to their residents, and what percentage are going to people who are driving through that town? Because I think that tells a story. And that also tells a story for the need for reform. And so, there are certainly aspects of the system, again, that we have improved, which is the pretrial jail populations have come down. There are other parts of the system that we can improve, which we touched on, the juvenile justice system, which is also part of the criminal justice system. And the best way we can improve it is just to divert people out of the system altogether. And so that is also a program that we're engaging in through violence disruptors. I think the mayor was touching on it about community engagement. Through grant funding, through a new initiative, we're working with a group called Cure Violence to get into the community in Trenton to work with community leaders, to work with teachers, to work with members of the community who could identify kids who are on the precipice of making that choice of entering a gang or not, and to disrupt that behavior when they're seeing it early to prevent somebody from getting into the system altogether. So the criminal justice system is broad in its reach. It touches us in a lot of different ways. There are multiple aspects of it that need reform. Certainly the behavior of the officers, which we're trying to improve through training, through the accountability measures that we spoke about earlier, the Colonel mentioned. It certainly includes the court system. It certainly includes our municipal courts, our superior courts, and our prosecutors' offices. But I think what's important is that, you know, sometimes you go and talk to prosecutors, and you go and talk to law enforcement officers, and you go and talk to correctional officers or the commissioner of corrections, and you talk about all these things that we want to get done, and no one pushes back. Everyone embraces it and says, you know what, we need to fix it. We need to get better. And I truly, truly think that we have the ability here in New Jersey, given the leadership across the state, given the buy-in that we have from law enforcement, to build something special that could stand really as a model for the rest of the country. And that's really what excites me the most about this year ahead of me, the working shoulder to shoulder with the Colonel, to making sure those next classes look like our communities, to making sure that our officers are behaving better, to also putting everything in perspective. Thousands of interactions each day, millions of interactions each year. There are outliers, and let's all be cognizant of that. We don't want those outliers, but those outliers shouldn't be used as a broad brush to paint the entire profession that on a day in and day out basis is really doing an incredible job. Can we get better? Of course we can get better. Should we have measures to hold folks accountable? Of course. But it is a large system, touches a lot of people, involves a lot of people, and everyone is committed to making it better.
Outstanding. First of all, let me also say this. If you have questions, please line up at the mics so that you can ask your question. We'll get you your question in 1 minute. Mayor Warren, in her best-selling and prolific study, The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Color Blindness. How many here saw the movie 13th? Raise your hand. Great. Michelle Alexander Esquire contends that the racial disparities in the criminal justice system are deliberate and likens the effect of the laws, structures, and institutions that comprise it to a new caste system reminiscent of what existed from the post-slavery and Jim Crow eras and into the civil rights movements of the 60s and 70s. In fact, she contends that the old system never truly ended, just adapted. Is she wrong or right?
We showed the movie 13th at the library twice so that our community can see it. But this issue of mass incarceration and how we got there, we should understand that many of the laws that operate in our criminal justice system are pre-Civil War laws, or very old laws when they didn't view black and brown people as full human beings. And those laws have changed somewhat incrementally over the years. And so it can cast you in a bad light. The fortunate thing for us is that the people who administer those laws have to have attitudes of openness and of change. And just because a law says that if you speed down the street that you have to get caught and you have to be fined, when you have people of conscience like our colonel who will look at you and sit down with a pastor and talk to a high official to say, how do we correct a problem that we see in the system? The law may be old and antiquated, but the implementation of it by people who are open-minded and who think about community first, there is where the change has to be. That's what our governor did in appointing this attorney general and this colonel, of people who can take antiquated laws but be thought leaders about how they applied fairly, justly, and progressively on how we get into a law enforcement system using those kinds of laws. So while they may be crafted that way, it's the implementation of it by professionals who think openly about community change. That's where the real difference is.
Before we go on, I understand that our two students have to leave, and we wanted to have a picture with them before they left, and we want to just say, go Harvard and Yale. Wow, man, that's just absolutely, just the thought of being in the same discussion. So if you guys, please come on up and stand here. We want to take a picture with you. We want to say, we knew you before. We knew you when. All right, as you, and we go, Sister Pottinger, come up here, Sister Pottinger. Is this Sister Pottinger, everybody? Sister Lorraine Pottinger is a little ball of fire, and she was one of the people very instrumental in actually getting the scholarship funds raised for these students through our annual year-end banquet. And so we want Sister Pottinger to come. Sister Pottinger, come stand right up here, girl. Come. Matter of fact, we want you, if you don't mind, stand. You're short, you're vertically challenged. If you don't mind standing right there. There you go. 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 Amen. Amen. So you guys, when you go to school, we're going to all say, we sent y'all to school. All right, so focus. God bless you. Come on, everybody, put your hands together and celebrate them. Celebrate them. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we do want to give you an opportunity to share your concerns, raise your questions. If you could please go to the mics now, because we do want to intersperse our questions with yours. So please go to the mics so you can speak to the team.
One last question up here, then we'll go to the audience. Colonel Callahan, you and the AG appointed the first Haitian American as Lieutenant Colonel of the State Police. The first in the history of the state. What do you think, first of all, how did you come up with that decision, why, and what do you think that means for the image of the higher up of the state police?
Thanks, Reverend. That lieutenant colonel's name is Fritz Frage. It was an easy decision. He was the best man for the job. He just happened to be black. He runs the Fusion Center, that Regional Operations Intelligence Center that the General spoke of, with internal and external partners across the whole country, federal, state, local entities. And there wasn't a position in that Fusion Center that Lieutenant Colonel Frage didn't hold throughout the course of his career. So it was a very simple decision for the Attorney General and I, and we interviewed a few people for it. And at that level, when you're a major, it's a pretty tight race, but Fritz's vision as it pertains to the opiate epidemic in the state, I think was a big factor in that decision. He's a phenomenal trooper, he's a phenomenal lieutenant colonel, and it was, like I said, it was a relatively easy decision for both of us.
Outstanding.
Yeah, the opioid epidemic obviously is an issue that's one of our priorities at the AG's office. It has to be. We lost 3,118 New Jerseyans to drug overdoses last year, and the majority of those were heroin and opioid related. And when the Colonel talks about Lieutenant Colonel Frage being really forward thinking as to how we could use data, he has built up the regional intelligence centers that we have in Newark and down south. But let me just give you an example of what Colonel Frage is doing. They are taking all sorts of data streams. They are taking data about Narcan reversals. That's when our local law enforcement officers go and save somebody with the reversal drug naloxone and bring them back to life from really death, from an overdose. They're taking that data. They're taking drug arrest data. They're taking pawn shop data. You know, who just sold something at a pawn shop? Are they on, these other lists where someone had just been arrested or released or put into hospital? So for some of our counties and municipal departments that don't have the money to be proactive, they're coming up with lists of the top 5 to 10 overdose victims or next potential overdoses in their municipalities, so our departments can get out there earlier to get that person some help, or at least offer that person some help and try to break that cycle of overdose, arrest, Narcan save, and try to prevent the next death. And that's really Lieutenant Colonel Frage's vision on bringing all that data together. And not just one example of how we're using data, but to address fines and fees, to address use of force. All of that is going to be run through the rock, and we need somebody like Lieutenant Colonel Frage. Frankly, I promoted him twice in a one-year period because he just impressed me that much, and I'm a data person, and so maybe I'm a little biased, and that's my bias, but he's really going to take the state police to the next level, so I couldn't be prouder to be part of the team in picking Lieutenant Colonel Frage.
Outstanding. We'll take a question. We'll start right here, and then we'll go right here. Sir?
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you for gracing us with your presence. Colonel, I have an observation and then a question. I live in Bloomfield. I travel southbound on the Parkway to work every day. At exit 147, so that's Springdale Avenue, there is one of your police officers there making enough revenue to pay the entire department at the end of the month. Now, the discrepancy that I have is that on the exit, the board says exit only, but on the road, there are broken lines. There are broken lines. So every time somebody comes down and they switch, the trooper gives them a ticket. It hasn't affected me, but one day
So your friend got affected, not you.
So many people, as I pass by in the mornings, I see it.
Okay.
I stopped one day and asked a trooper, why is it that this is happening? Very nice guy. He said to me, they're not supposed to come so close and change lane. I said, but there is a big dichotomy here. The sign says exit only, but then you have broken lines. So many people have had tickets in this crucial time, have to go and pay these amounts. Can we either make those lines solid so that it becomes a violation if you cross? Thank you, Colonel.
As you were speaking, the first person that came to mind is the Commissioner of DOT, who's a close friend, Diane Gutierrez Scachetti, and I will speak to her Monday about either take the exit only sign down or make that a solid line, and it should not. The other piece I'll just add, though, is not every motor vehicle stop ends with a summons. The troopers do have what I call one of their greatest things is discretion, and I hope that they use it appropriately and people can leave with a warning. But if you're telling me that there's folks out there getting summonses, then I'll certainly believe you. But I'll talk to the DOT commissioner on Monday.
Thank you, Colonel. Right here.
Yes. My question, I'd like a response from all three gentlemen. What are the benefits and the disadvantage of privatization of the penal institution?
Of the peanut?
Penal, correct.
Penal institution, the jail and the prison.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I said peanut.
So, yeah. I'm trying to think, and this is actually outside of both of our lanes. This would come under the Commissioner of the Department of Corrections. I don't believe, and I don't want to get this wrong, but I don't believe we have privatized any state facilities. It's at the federal level where you see either immigration detention facilities have been privatized or even federal detention facilities have been privatized. And it's a multi-billion-dollar industry across the country. And they're very powerful lobbies that keep that industry profitable and successful. So we don't have that issue at the state level. From my perspective, as someone who oversees law enforcement operations, I think it is easier to have accountability when you're dealing with everyone in your sort of chain of command and everyone that you could, within government. And when you start bringing private actors, I don't think they have that same level of discipline that we would have in our law enforcement agencies and our state departments of corrections. So I think from a transparency point of view, from an accountability point of view, from setting policy and making sure it's being adhered to, that's a benefit you would have if you didn't have privatization. I also think that you are hearing some horror stories, and there's been very detailed reporting about tragic situations and conditions at private facilities. And so I think that might be related, that you don't have the type of transparency and accountability and oversight you would have if you had control of the entire system.
Mayor Warren?
My chief concern is legally and policy-wise, the strong lobbies of these private institutions actually seek to have legislators establish laws that require prison terms. Sometimes it could just be probation or parole, but they would push to make sure there's mandatory sentencing, because when you have mandatory sentencing, it fills up their prisons. And any time that an operation has to exist for profit to please those people who own stocks and bonds in the company and to try to push profit, it's never good to have profit when you're doing public service. And ultimately, where the buck always stops with the governor or the president or the mayor, in my case, if it's private, we can't just throw the bum out. It's a corporate entity who has a contract and has to push their profit. And that's always dangerous because the people are not the bosses. It becomes the profiteering and the companies that are, and that's always dangerous for social service.
It's hard for an English major to expound upon two eloquent lawyers, but to the mayor's point, I think when it becomes a bottom line question and about dollars and cents, that's when it starts to lose common sense. So I just, you know, from that perspective, the correctional system should not be a for-profit business from my personal and professional standpoint.
Outstanding. Mr. President.
Colonel.
Or
question
Colonel.
is, what would you do if you found somebody with marijuana?
Well, at this point, Jaden, it is illegal. But back to the point with regards to discretion, it certainly, one, depends upon the amount. It depends upon where they are. And as I shared with you in the pastor's office, my greatest concern with those folks with marijuana is if they decide to get behind the wheel of a car. And I also worry about the fact that there may be edible marijuana in the form of candy, which I don't think, to the mayor's point again, will serve our young men and women any good in our community. So I know that was a bit of a long answer to what I would do, but at this point it is still illegal. But we'll see what the legislature and the governor decide to do about it. But as a father, I would just encourage you and your friends to avoid it at all costs.
And another question is, what do you have to do to become a state
trooper? That's a great question. And just so you know, the general and I are meeting with the mayor's brother on February 11th. We have a meeting with the NAACP in order, again, to have the state police look like the makeup of New Jersey. I think we could certainly do better. We've had, the past decade has seen a lot of diversity, but especially among young black males, we're not doing too well, and I'll be completely candid. But the first thing that is important is your college education. You need an associate's or a bachelor's degree. I would also recommend between your junior and senior year of high school, you can come down and spend a week at Seagirt and see what the training is like to become a state trooper. If you apply and you get into the academy, it's 6 months training where you live down at Seagirt. You get to come home on the weekends. You'll get in shape. It is very stressful, but it's designed around young men and women being able to come out and bring calm to chaotic situations. So I would love to talk to you for the next 7 years about being a trooper. And there's nothing I'd like more than if by any chance I was still the colonel, for you to walk across that stage and for me to hand you your badge and call you State Trooper Jaden.
We're going to go right here. Yes, you. Yes.
Okay. Regarding the Youth Summer Police Academy, how long has this program been around?
I'm going to say that's almost in its 35th or maybe 40 years. I remember I didn't go to it as a young teenager, but my younger sister did, and that was some 30 years ago. So I'm going to say maybe 30 or 35 years.
Okay, that's good. Okay, so how do you recruit the youth from the communities, from church base, from schools? How do you recruit them to be at that summer camp, and how do you get the information out to the parents?
That's up to our recruiting unit as well as our public information office. Our website, which is njsp.org. I could certainly, and have before, even at St. Matthew's, brought the applications right to the church because, again, to the general's point, it can't just be the state police out there recruiting. We need the help of the entire community to plant that seed in a high school student's mind that maybe a career in service and in law enforcement is something that he or she would desire. And I could certainly afterwards offline just give you my direct line, and I'll make sure that you get as many applications. We always have a phenomenal representation from Essex County. For the last, I want to say 20 years, we have just tremendous representation from Essex County, and I would imagine this summer would be no different.
Okay, so do you have community leaders dropping these forms off to the different schools and church communities?
Yes, we have a recruiting unit that does that, yes. And the other great spot is on our Facebook page, which gets updated all the time. We have a special section for recruiting, and it's not just about recruiting to the state police, but it's about recruiting into that Trooper Youth Week program that we call it.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Outstanding, thank you. Sir?
Thank you. I'm following up on the young man's question here. With the pending legalization of marijuana, I take it that it means that there will be a lot of, could you hear me?
Can you come up to the mic a little closer?
Yeah. With the pending legalization of marijuana, I take it you would have a release of a lot of low-level drug offenders from the prison system. What plan do you have to reintroduce these guys or guys or girls, men or women, into the community? And what training are you giving them right now so that they can become a part of the community again? I say that because I'm a business owner in Newark, and a couple of years ago, a young man came to me seeking a job. So I asked him, what experience you have? He said, I've just come out of prison for some 20 years or something like that. What can you do? There's nothing. I run a printing business, so that has some kind of high-tech training to it. I cannot hire a person. I don't care whether he was in prison or whether or not, but I'm not going to just hire someone because to hire someone, I need someone who could be an asset to my business.
Mm-hmm. So, to your point, if they legalize, and I don't know what the final legislation is going to look like, it's going to be for adult use, and it'll be for personal use quantities, and there's going to be a limit on how much someone can have on them, and there'll be restrictions. So generally, those are not the people who are in our prisons right now. This is not going to legalize the distribution of marijuana. It's not going to legalize the production of marijuana at a large scale. It's not going to, and we don't know what the final legislation is. So it's not really the folks who are incarcerated on marijuana charges that this is going to affect. It's going to affect the person who has that use arrest, the possession arrest for small quantities, and generally not a prison sentence associated with it, but they need to get their record expunged. So we're putting in place tools. We have expungement units at the state police. I believe the last version of the legislation that I saw had the expungement piece for marijuana being done by the administrative office of the courts, so it could be done more quickly. But putting that aside, I think reentry has to be done better. And I think there are a lot of private organizations that do a good job, like the New Jersey Reentry Corporation, on helping folks who are coming out to clear fines and fees and warrants while they're in, and to try to get them a license, the availability of a license when they get out, so you can rent a home or rent an apartment or get to a job. Little things that you wouldn't even think of, that people who would go to apply for a license after they came out get arrested sometimes by the officer who's there because a warrant shows up or something comes up. And so we're trying to address those problems with our Department of Corrections. And I know they're doing a lot more on training, but again, that's not in our lane as far as the colonel or the attorney general. This is in our Department of Corrections on getting better at reentry programs, and they are. They're trying to do more job training and practical skills behind the wall.
But are these folks getting any training in technical, in jobs, any job training while they're in prison, or they just being there?
No, so they do. They do, and we need to get better. And as I mentioned earlier, we don't do a great job. But the commissioner who's there now, Commissioner Marcus Hicks, is forward-thinking. He's progressive. He's trying to bring about change to the department and to introduce reentry type programs and to make it a more robust program so people are leaving there better than they came in. And that's a commitment that he shares, I know. But again, they can do better.
If I could just add locally, Councilman Wooten and Councilman Eason have already begun to work with us in terms of putting on programs where we have legal days, job fair days, career days, where we teach how to do resumes and so forth. Those kinds of activities are going to start to increase as this whole issue of marijuana turns around. And we are encouraging, and we have probably the largest churches, this church, Councilman Wooten's church at Ebenezer, St. Matthew's with Councilman Easton's church, and certainly Bethel, we're at Councilman Coley's church. All of those pastors are interested in how do we build a coalition around bringing those people home, working with probation, working with parole, and what are their needs, assessing their needs, and then bring the experts in that can address them.
Thank you.
And the expungement seminars as well. Thank you.
If there's anyone that is interested, has someone that has come out of the prison system and they are reentering into society, the AG and the Colonel work closely with a gentleman by the name of Reverend Steffi Bartley and Mayor Warren as well. He is the state president of National Action Network. They have a program called NAN Tech World, 6-week program. It's on Hawthorne Avenue in Newark. They can get Cisco certification. You don't need a college degree. You need a high school, and it's free of charge. Get a Cisco certification, and a Cisco certification means that you can go out and get a help desk job making probably $60,000 or $70,000 per year. Panasonic is one of their sponsors, City of Newark, and now the State of New Jersey Department of Community Affairs. NAN Tech World in Newark on Hawthorne Avenue, free of charge. Right here, sir.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Mayor, Mr. Colonel, I would just like to say from a law enforcement point of view, since I moved to the state of New Jersey, I have not had a negative experience with the law enforcement team in Orange, nor the state trooper. However, Colonel, I have a question. And I'm looking for a perspective, not a right or wrong answer, a perspective. I have 2 questions. But the first question for you, Mr. Colonel, is this. In the past, when I've been pulled over by the state trooper or the local police in Orange, like I said, they've been very respectful. I've never had a negative experience. But can you tell me why they ask, what do you do for a living?
You know, that's news to me. It was never.
Everyone has asked me that. And when I say what I do, I'm like, oh, okay, go.
I have never, I think maybe in the course of conversation where I'd say, where are you coming from or where are you heading? And they'd say, I'm going to work. That may come up as a way of, sometimes even that simple conversation is a de-escalation or it's just a conversation. So it's not in our training to ask what a person does for a living. But I do think if it leads to that encounter, whether it's 2 minutes or 5 minutes, being one that, as I spoke about earlier, just being one that's filled with calmness from both sides. But it's really not a question that we ask our troopers or law enforcement officers to.
I'm not complaining. It has worked for me. I'm not complaining. I'm just
maybe the trooper's looking for another job.
Okay, so, and also in business, they say it's not who you know, it's who knows you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a gentleman over here who wants to be a state trooper. Can you talk to him afterwards?
Certainly.
I'm just trying to connect.
Certainly. He'll have my card before I walk out the door, and I'd be honored to talk to him.
Make sure you do, please.
Raise your hand. Where is he?
Sir, Mr. Lewis, the AG wants to know.
You could even, I just gave a tour on another thing I like to do personally. Is anyone interested, is I personally will take them through our museum to show the almost 100-year history, and I also finish by taking anybody up to the Rock to show what we do in that fusion center, and it gives you a great sense and a 10,000-foot view of what the state police is all about. It really is so much more than just writing tickets and handling accidents. So I'd be honored to do that too.
So my final question is for the AG and for law enforcement also. In New York City, we've seen a lot of first, in college, when I did a journalism class, they defined news as anything that's reported. If it's not reported, it's not news. But it doesn't mean it didn't happen. So in New York City, we see a lot of horror stories with law enforcement contact with citizens who are mentally ill. We hear horror stories in jails where mentally ill residents or people, guests of the state or the city, have horror stories. They don't get treatment. What is New Jersey? What is it like in New Jersey? It's not reported, so I don't know about it. Doesn't mean it's not happening. How are the mentally ill treated, and are they getting the right treatment? And how are the law enforcement? Are they trained well on how to deal with mentally ill persons? I have not heard of a person being shot by a state trooper, et cetera, but it doesn't mean it doesn't happen.
Right. So that's a great question. We have something around 36,000 sworn law enforcement officers in New Jersey. And my predecessor, Chris Perino, instituted a program of training that in the first 3 years of that program, there were certain required trainings that all 36,000 law enforcement officers had to go through. And in the first year, de-escalation training was part of that. So all 36,000 state law enforcement officers got some form of de-escalation training. And what de-escalation training is simply what the Colonel talked about. It could be just having a conversation with somebody to try to calm them down, giving our law enforcement officers more tools in their toolbox to resolve a situation without conflict. Verbal judo is one type of training, or specific questions to ask someone who's going through a mental crisis to de-escalate the situation. So I think we've gotten better in this state. The gold standard of training for what you're speaking about is called crisis intervention training. And that's something that I offered when I was a county prosecutor. I paid for it and made it available to all of county law enforcement to take that training. And that training gets it right. But the problem with that training, or not problem really, the issue with that training, it's 5 days and it's 40 people and it's team. It's law enforcement and community. And by community, it's folks from the mental health community, it's social services, it's the hospitals, all working together, because the goal is to learn those techniques, but also to develop the contact with the social service provider, that if you encounter someone in your community, you can then, instead of taking them to jail, you can call 262-HELP, which was the crisis line in Bergen County, and get the mental health professional there and do the warm handoff to social services or to mental health services. So that is the gold standard. A lot of our prosecutors' offices offer that to local law enforcement, and it works. I remember I offered one class. The week after that class, a Port Authority police officer who took that class de-escalated a situation with someone going through a mental health crisis who was about to jump off the George Washington Bridge, and using the techniques that this person learned in that class was able to save a life. And to me, that was worth the $10,000 or the $15,000 that we paid to train 40 officers in 1 week. And so I think that'll start to happen across the state, but that's really the direction in which we're headed in this state, to give our officers one more tool.
All right, now, our time is far spent, everyone. It's now about 8 minutes before 6 o'clock. We had planned to be right around this time wrapping up. We were thinking 5:30, so you have to definitely leave at 6. So we need to kind of bring this thing on home. So if we could have these as the last questions, and then they'll get a chance to exit stage left, and we will have final words as they make their exits.
Before Tom goes, it's Black History Month, and I think we ought to give the NAACP a round of applause for being the oldest civil rights organization in the world. Tom Perrier is a legend in the NAACP community. Please ask your question.
Thank you, Pastor. I have two questions, one for the mayor and one for the AG.
Got to have one, only one.
Let me go, Mayor, you're excused for the time being. To the AG then. Recently, the governor has signed the independent prosecutor legislation. It is now law. Would you please explain to us, should it be used, how will it work?
It's law and we're abiding by it. The independent prosecutor bill was signed by Governor Murphy last Thursday, I believe, or Wednesday, and it calls for the Attorney General's office to oversee the investigation and prosecution of all officer-involved fatal shootings and in-custody deaths. And so that's what's going on right now. Any officer-involved shooting that occurs or fatality in custody or as a result of a law enforcement encounter since last Thursday is being investigated by the Attorney General Shooting Response Task Force, and all prosecutions will be done in accordance, investigations and prosecutions will be done in accordance with that bill. It has other measures that should there be a criminal charge that results from that investigation, that charge is supposed to be tried in a different county, that the court has to transfer that case out of the county in which the incident happened. And so that's the system that's in place. Unfortunately, the bill did not give us lead time to build out the capacity to do these investigations. It was effective immediately. We had asked the legislators if they were going to push forward this bill that they give us 6 months or a year to build out a statewide shooting response team, because these are very, very important investigations for the community, for law enforcement, for accountability, and they have to be done right. And we have to be able to respond quickly to any scene across the state, to hold that scene, to preserve evidence, to get videotapes if they exist, body cams, do interviews, to have the resources to do the interviews. The goal of this bill was to take the county prosecutors out of it, because there was a sense that you could not trust a county prosecutor to investigate local law enforcement. But what the folks who pushed forward the bill didn't really think about is, if you're sending the Attorney General's shooting response team from Trenton to Patterson, where are we supposed to do the interviews? Where are we supposed to, we can't take all the witnesses back to Trenton. We need to use local resources to some extent, as we would in any other investigation, and we'll probably have to, because that's the way we do all of our investigations. We have to go to the prosecutor's office and use an interview room so we can record an interview and get somebody's memory right there. So if that investigation should lead to a charge, we get the best possible evidence to try that case. If that evidence shows that the officer was diffusing a situation where there was a gang event and saved somebody's life by intervening, well, we should be able to collect that evidence and show that the shooting was legally justified. So there are some unintended consequences of the bill that those who were pushing forward it in the legislature did not see, but we're going to do everything possible to implement it and to make sure those investigations are done in the best possible way to ensure integrity in the criminal justice system and to ensure accountability. And it's going to be a little bit of a process while we build out the system at the same time.
Outstanding. Take a question here. Councilman.
Councilman Harold Johnson,
yes, sir.
Orange, New Jersey, West Ward. I'd like to thank Reverend Stoddard and the panel for everyone coming and sharing today. It's very important that this is held in the community. Since our mayor is the only elected official up there in the legislature, I want to direct my comment to him, not because I don't want to talk about the criminal stuff, but we may be faced with one of the biggest challenges in our time in Essex County and in Orange, with this whole legalization of marijuana. The community needs to be educated and the community needs to be involved. So I'm directing this to you, Mayor. You'll probably be the first person to get all the inside stuff from senators and legislators out of Trenton when it hits, whether it's going to be vetoed or passed. We need to go into some type of a planned action to get and to galvanize and get the word out to our communities, because this will probably be the toughest vote that I have to vote on whether or not this should come to our town. So I would like for you to speak to that, Mayor.
That's true. Thank you very much. It's very important. I know that Councilwoman Eason and Wooten partnershiped on an information session on this whole marijuana issue. But it's going to take all of us really to go into the community to explain what it is, how it affects us, not only from a legal standpoint, but medically as well, and what it's going to do to our schools. I'm going to convene a meeting of us, of the City Council, and myself, and administrators, to find out what our stance is going to be. If it is legalized, how are we going to protect our students, and what are we going to do in terms of legislation at the local level that's going to have an impact on however they decide one way or the other. So certainly we'll be able to do that, but once we meet, then we're going to go out into the community. I'm going to draft all the council people to go out with me all over the community to discuss this issue, because it affects us everywhere, every household, and we have to be vigilant about it. I'm glad you brought that up. To Ms. Perrier, we, on the local level, will cooperate with the Attorney General, including making entrees to private institutions such as churches to make sure they have the kind of space they need if investigations have to come up locally. So we'll work with them in however we need to do it.
Last two questions.
Oh, hi. I just wanted to address the panel to say hello to everybody. Pretty much caught wind of this from Councilwoman Williams, and I shot up here right away.
Did she tell you this is Steeler country? Did she?
Say that again, Mayor?
Did she tell you this was Pittsburgh Steeler country?
Nah, this is for sale, actually. Okay. But I'm just a walk-in mannequin, actually.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
That is true. It's true. I'm actually selling. But like I said, I came up here, and I just wanted to thank everybody here. I believe you're Reverend of the church here. That address is well, I believe it was you that said that, though. Nantucket Board is 400 Hawthorne Avenue, just to let everybody know. Okay. I didn't thank the mayor for bringing this here, because I think it's very important, this panel. AG Grewal, I'd like to thank you as well. I spoke to you at the PAC a month and a half ago, if you remember me. I'm always talking about veteran issues.
Yes.
There's two things I wanted to touch on. Number one, I wanted to touch on that we still have not had a safe surrender done in this area in quite some time, and I think that's not right at all. Because again, you were touching on the warrants and all that type of stuff. That's an actual good program, because a lot of people would turn themselves in so they can relieve themselves so they don't be driving suspended and what have you, because they have that little warrant there for something minute that turns into, like how the superintendent said, gets bigger and then they wind up in jail. I've been through that, so I know how that works. That's one thing. And the last thing I want to talk about, again, is about the imprisonment of a lot of veterans that I'm seeing, whether I know them directly or see it. Me and you were talking about how about the prosecutors, whether they're state or local, municipal, what have you, that I don't believe they're implementing that program as far as the program they have for these gentlemen or women to actually get themselves out of the criminal justice system because of whatever reason, whether it's from a PTSD, anxiety, what have you. I've been there, I know that, I go through that myself at the VA, so I know exactly what I'm talking about, and that's why I'm saying that we need to do better with that, because there's too many sitting down here at this green monster, AKA Essex County Jail, that shouldn't be sitting there, and the only thing they need pretty much is somebody to find out what's going on with them, and you'll be very surprised if you pull their record, their medical record, what's inside of there. And a lot of times these guys have medical histories that at the end of the day, if they did something criminal, they should be dealt with, but they're saying that they have this programs to help them to relieve their criminal record. It's not really being implemented, to be honest with you. That's why I go to all these meetings, and I keep listening, watching to hear what's going on with that, and it's not enough being done with that.
So, thank you, brother.
So, all right. And like I said, I deal with the homeless too, and that's part of it. A lot of them become homeless because of the criminalization.
Rahat, can you raise your hand? Can you give him your card?
Okay, no problem.
No, but let me address the fugitive safe surrender. We have not done that in a long time.
Absolutely.
And it's something that we have considered. It's a difficult program to run. It takes a lot of...
Yeah, I imagine. I get all those entities together, the judges, the lawyers.
So, but what we did do this year,
departments.
and it wasn't us, I can't take credit for this. This is, again, the vision of the Chief Justice.
Yes, sir.
Who dismissed, I think it was something like 700,000 plus open warrants. Older fines and fees, older warrants, to address the issue that you just raised.
Yes, sir.
So that's a very bold move that our courts took, that we supported, and that should address some of the issues that you raised, but we'll look into fugitive safe surrender. We spoke at NJPAC, right?
Yes, sir.
At the
Paul
Fishman meeting?
Attorney General, U.S. Attorney General.
Yeah, so on the Veterans Diversion Courts, that was legislated. Every county should have one. That's why I want you to connect with Rahat.
They have it. The problem is that the language is there is subject up to the prosecutor to implement it, which is wrong because he or she don't know what that veteran may have if they don't know their record. So they don't have the record. It takes time to get that record.
We need to get your information because there are guidelines in place on how that should be run.
Yes, sir.
It could be certain crimes are disqualified. Certain violent crimes and offenses, you're not allowed, even, if you're a veteran suffering from PTSD, there are certain crimes that you cannot take benefit of that or advantage of that diversion program. So maybe there's an issue with how they're communicating or operating it, and if it's an issue in Essex County, we'll be happy to follow up with.
No, I understand. It's just that what I'm noticing is that they're not like trying to figure out what that is prior to that. It's like the criminalization happens, and then you go down to the county superior court, what have you, and they're not actually pulling to find out what the medical aspect is, and if they qualify for it. So it's up to the prosecutor if he or she wants to do it, and I think that's wrong.
I just need the details, right? We're talking in abstract terms right now. If there's a particular case where it wasn't looked into, please, talk to him and give us the information, and we'll follow up with Prosecutor Stevens to see why it's not running as it should, or if it's running as it should to tell you why the case that was resolved in a certain way.
I understand, and I'm just glad that the governor also has implemented what the gentleman said over there about the as far as the investigating.
Yep.
That's an actual good thing. I'm glad Mr. Murphy did sign that bill. That was very important.
Outstanding. Last question.
Pastor gets the last.
I'm Kathy. I live in the South Ward. Sorry. First, sorry.
There you go.
Thank you. Okay. Again, my name is Kathy. I live in the South Ward on Sterling. First, I'm impressed with the programs and the initiatives that you presented today, and they're good starts in our community. But I have a question about with these reforms, especially those that impact revenue, where are you going to get the money to, I guess, help implement or supplement the fees and things that have to be, I'm sorry. So what I'm basically trying to say is that our property taxes are pretty high. And if you have reforms that are going to reduce the revenue that comes into the town, I guess I'm just trying to figure out where are we going to get the money from?
Is that to me or the mayor?
That is mostly to the mayor, but anyone can answer.
I would commend you to go look at the Supreme Court's review on fines and fees. And it's a very thoughtful analysis and a detailed analysis. It's something like 400 million in fines and fees are collected each year, and about half of that goes to the municipalities. And it's a huge source of revenue, and it fills gaps in budgets, and it's used for budgeting. But also, there's an analysis in there of surcharges and other fees and how they're used to support different programs, and it's pretty eye-opening. Certainly, there has to be fines and fees. There has to be some deterrence, and there has to be some accountability, but there also has to be some reason to those fines and fees. And they don't vary on ability to pay, and they just, again, create this vicious cycle which ends up costing us much more. The cost of incarceration, the cost of putting someone through the criminal justice system, the cost of reentry, the costs associated with that cycle. I mean, homelessness and other issues. So it's not as black and white that if you get rid of fines and fees, you're going to have to fill budget holes. There will be an equalization, I think, because there's so many attendant costs to fines and fees that we don't realize.
Okay, fair enough. I know that at least where I stay, the property taxes support the municipality. And if the municipality has put into initiatives that will reduce or some maybe equalize, let's say, those fines and fees, I guess where I sit, it's like you're taking money out of this pot. Where are you going to get it if we have a certain level of bills and things that we have to pay as a city?
Well, let the mayor make the final word.
Yep.
Okay. Your fines and fees will continue to be imposed as our police do their jobs. But when we say we're going to do it in a way that's fair and not as a way to treat people as an ATM, in those cases where you find abuse, by the time the person appeals and we have to give the money back, we don't make that money anyway. We make money by fining people and assessing people fairly across the board. Where it's not being done properly, we lose that money. Even though we had to pay a person to process the ticket, we had to pay for the ticket itself, we can end up losing that money if it isn't done properly. So our call is to do it properly across the board, be aggressive and firm about it, but do it in a way where we don't have people having to go back after appeal, but we have to give the money back anyway.
Let's give our panelists a round.
Come on, everybody, put your hands together. To Colonel Callahan, we want to say thank you so much for being here. God bless you, sir. Good to see you again. Attorney General Grewal, we are so delighted that you came. And both of you all have a speaking engagement here on a regular Sabbath service, all right? So we're going to coordinate that. Man, wasn't it wonderful to have them? Everybody put your hands together. We're thankful to God that they were able to come by. And they do have to go now. So I'm going to escort them back a little bit, but I've got to say this to us before you leave, let me say this to you, because you might be shocked at what I'm about to say. You might be shocked. As a pastor, and a Seventh-day Adventist, I don't drink. I don't believe in drinking alcohol. I believe drinking is terrible. I don't smoke cigarettes. I believe smoking is awful. Surely I don't smoke weed because I believe it's terrible. Are y'all with me, everybody? All of these are, when I sat with on the New Jersey Transition Finance Committee, the issue was about how do we deal with the sin taxes and how do we continue to raise revenue in the state. I'm going to say this and then I'm going to get out your way. Ladies and gentlemen, the issue of marijuana legalization is a real life issue. Two things to keep in mind. I already know that it's about the money. Hello. It's about the money. We know that. But the ancillary issues are astounding to consider. Consider what's going to happen with those who've been incarcerated and potential expungement of their records. What's going to happen in terms of the comparisons that we make, and Kevin is going to help me with this. See, because I did some research recently, and I found out that over 80,000 people die annually from alcohol-related deaths. Over 80,000. About 500 die annually from marijuana-related deaths across the board. That doesn't include gun violence or turf wars. I've often wondered, how does marijuana legalization affect guys fighting in Newark for turf for the sale of marijuana? How will it potentially impact that? And so this is a question that I've wrestled with. And I wrestled with this specifically because my brother got killed in 1996. When we went to the trial, the young man that shot him said he was selling weed and we went to rob him. And we saw him walk behind the counter. We thought he was going to get a gun, so we opened fire on him and shot him. They walked out of the little shop that he had in North Philly and locked the door. My brother had his last thing that he did was he picked up the phone and he called 911. And we got to hear the 911 tape of his call for help. The ambulance came, but they couldn't find the place where he was because the guys had locked this door. Eventually, when they got to him, by the time they got to him, he was gone. 39 years old, wife and 2 children, gone. And I looked at it from both angles. I looked at it from the vantage point of, okay, my brother died because of marijuana. In a way, very directly. He was shot and killed because he was involved with marijuana. At least the kids thought he was. And I about 6 years ago, I preached against marijuana legalization. I preached against it because I don't believe in, I believe our bodies are the temples of the Holy Ghost. We're bought with a price. Shouldn't be defiling the temple. And as you can see, I lost 20 pounds because I've been fasting. I didn't hear any amens. Don't get me started. But here's the thing. I thought this to myself. Could it be that if there was a legitimate way for my brother to be doing whatever he was doing, could it be that he'd be still alive? I asked myself that question. I don't know. I don't know. Could be, couldn't be. But for me, the issue, while it was clear to me about 6 years ago, as I mulled it over, it's not as clear as it was to me back then. Because I asked myself, are there more pros to one side, cons to the other side? Where are the benefits and the pitfalls on both sides of the argument? And I know we all get emotional about the argument. We all are invested in this thing. How will it affect our community? How will it affect our kids in high school? Here's the final thing I'll say, and then I'm going to get out your way. I was born and raised in a place called Jamaica. In Jamaica, Mr. Mayor, there's weed everywhere. Everywhere you go, there's ganja. Are y'all hearing me? When I was 10, I smoked my first spliff. It wasn't a joint, it was a spliff. A guy named Mike worked on our farm. He was a Rasta. He brought about a pound in a bag. And I'd been messing with my grandfather's cigarettes. Are y'all with me? My experience at 10 was not good. So by the time I was 11, I quit. And when I went to high school and all the guys said to me, you want to join? I'm like, no, I quit. Here's what I found out. In a place like Jamaica where it's available like stones, people who are going to smoke are going to smoke. And people who are not are not. You're going to make up your mind, no matter whether it's available or not, whether this is the path you're going to go down, or I've seen enough damage that I will never go down that road. I chose with the other 3 of my siblings, there are 6 of us, 2 chose to keep hitting it, but 4, that means keep smoking weed. Right? Hitting the joint, smoking the chalice, whatever else, the bong, whatever you want to call it. But 4 of us chose that that's not the path we wanted. Although it was absolutely available everywhere. And you know what we found? We made the right choice because of how we were grounded. And we made the right choice because we had vision and direction. Are y'all listening to me? So I'm saying, listen, we can be worried about our children, yea or nay, but the kids that don't want to smoke are not going to smoke. The kids that want to smoke, guess what? I don't care what you tell them. Because it's not like legalizing it is going to make it more available. They know where to find it now. Hello, somebody. They know where to find it now. If they're going to smoke, they're going to smoke. We've got to make sure they have a vision. We inspire them with direction, with clarity, with hope, so that they'll determine, come hell or high water, I've got a bright future, and this is a dark place. I will not go to the dark place. Is that all right, everybody? And that's the final word. Now let's stand for the benediction. Kevin, I want you to pray some stuff that you studied in this final prayer and let us go.
Thank you, Pastor. So my name is Kevin Bennett. I'm the Religious Liberties and Social Justices Ministry Leader for the church. And was this informative? Was this helpful? It was very. We would love to be able to do more of these, in the coming weeks and months, and we'll definitely reach out to the mayor and other members of the city council and state officials as well too, to try and do more of these as we try to go beyond the walls and engage the community in 2019. Let us petition the Lord for dismissal. Heavenly Father, thank you so much again, Lord, for sparing our lives to see another Holy Sabbath day, Lord. Thank you for the spiritual food you fed us with all day today, Lord. And thank you for the time that was put in to pull this program together, from the morning with Chaplain Barry Black to this afternoon with our
AG, our state police superintendent, and the very many different city and local officials, Father. Thank you for the clarity with which you allowed everyone to speak, Lord. Thank you for the vulnerability they were able to express and getting their points across, Lord. We pray, Father, that we will learn from this experience. We pray, Lord, that you'll continue to guide us as we continue to explore these kinds of topics that affect our very lives in a real, tangible way on a daily basis, Lord. As we dismiss from this place, Lord, may we never, ever be away from your presence. Keep us safe and keep us strengthened and refreshed for another trying week ahead, Lord, and bring us back next week again to celebrate your most holy name. Thank you again, Lord. In your most holy name we pray. Amen. Amen. Amen.